So good evening and welcome. And while our distinguished guests are getting settled, I'll just welcome you again to Africa Writes here at the British Library. I'm Katie Eagleton. I'm the head of Asian and African Studies here. And I joined the library less than a year ago, so it's a huge pleasure to be here tonight. I remember this time last year knowing I was about to come and work in this amazing place, but it never occurred to me I would be on a stage with these two amazing women. I'm going to introduce Wangui Goro to kick things off, and then she'll do the rest of the introductions for there. And, well, what to say? She's a thinker, a writer, a translator, a campaigner, just does all sorts of incredible things that I can't begin to capture. And she'd asked me to not say very much because this isn't her evening, but it's hard not to say a few things. As an academic, she's researched things on translation, and not just translation of words, but of ideas and understandings and experiences. She's translated some incredible works of literature and worked with authors like Veronique Tadjo and Ngugi Thiong'o. And as a writer in her own right, she's written poetry and short stories, essays, different formats, different things in fiction and non-fiction. And in fact, there's a direct link between our two guests tonight because she wrote a short story called Deep Sea Fishing, which was in Amma's anthology, African Love Stories. And as well as all of that, she's found time to be here tonight, and she's been a great supporter of the Caine Prize. And so we're very glad to welcome her this evening. And ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Wangui Goro.
I'm really honored to be here today. Amma?
Yeah.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
Akwaba.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm really delighted, and I wanted to ask for your indulgence because although this is not an academic conference, and I know all of you know Amma, it's a very special event for us here in London. So I feel in the footsteps of Nana Wilson Tago that I should give you a fairly comprehensive introduction. Not too comprehensive. But it's comprehensive, not too comprehensive. There's some people in the audience, most of them know you.
This is very interesting because in Ghana, people will get on the stage and in the audience, half of them wouldn't know the speaker. And they will just say, Mr. this or Dr. that. We all know they don't need any introduction.
Well, it's not going to stop me from... It's not going to stop me. But before I do that, I would really like to say thank you very much to the Royal Africa Society and the British Library and the team, Shayla, for this wonderful evening and for accepting to invite Ama Ata Aidoo for us here in London. When I chatted with with Shayla, Ama Ata, when I chatted with Shayla about having you here, she said, yes, we'll look into it, but I never dreamt that I would be the one who would be having this conversation with you, so I'm really, really honored. But they said today that we're supposed to be reflecting on your expansive literary career, and we're going to discuss the main themes which emerge from your works. Although today, as I said, is not a day for academic discourse, it would be a travesty for me not to say that Ama Ata Aidoo, of course, is very special to us, and I hope we'll have ample opportunities to have an interaction with her, and I'll try as hard as I can to leave a lot of room for discussion at the end. So please prepare your questions, whether you've come with them from your reading groups, whether you've read your own scholarly work, or whether you've just met Amma today for the first time. I hope this is going to be a very exciting evening. In time, I believe, and I think time will tell us this, and I will assert it here as my own view, and any of you and others elsewhere is welcome to critique me, but I believe that Ama Ata Aidoo is a tour de force of global literature of this period. Amma is undoubtedly one of the foremost African literary giants of our time, whose work has received reception globally, particularly in the English-speaking world, but in translation too. She has received numerous accolades, including in her own Ghana, where Amma is recognized as Ghana's literary living legend, alongside Aiko. But it's true, there was a ceremony at the national... Oh, so bad. There was a ceremony and Amma went, so she can giggle, but it's true. Alongside Aikwe Amma, Kwesi Brew, and the late Kofi Abono, who we know these are tremendous writers, and several other awards. And please don't stop me. Since her early writing in 1962. Of course, we know that Amma was born in Ghana, where she graduated from the University of Legon, and she served in an academic capacity in many parts of the world, including in Ghana, where she taught, in America, in Zimbabwe. And we also know that she served as a Minister of Education between 1983 and 1984.
82, 83.
82, 83. It's going to be fun. You'll hear me say later that Amma is very sharp, as you can see. But we've decided to have fun today. Amma is a novelist, a short story writer is how most of us have encountered her, but of course, who can forget that Amma is a playwright, and she has been recognized for her work, and some of her plays were performed at even Ghana's 50th anniversary. Her work has been performed here in the US and in many parts of the world, and many of you have seen it. And many literary critics and reviewers and journalists have reviewed Amma's work. And I'd like to cite here the very important work recently by Anne V. Adams, which were essays in your honor, in the honor of Ama Ata Aidoo at 70, a reader of African cultural studies, which was published by Ayebia Clark Publishing. I hope Ayebia is here. Well, we salute you, Ayebia, for this wonderful work. And I hope that you will have an opportunity to look at it, but I know that there's a wonderful letter, introductory letter from our own Margaret Busby, MBE. Margaret, can we recognize you? Maurice Condé, Michel Remogo, Obioma Niameka, Lynn Ines, Biodun Jeifo, James Gibbs, Abena Busia, Juliana Makuchi, Kofi Anyidoho, Carol Boyce Davies, Nana Wilson Tego, Yaba Bada. They've all contributed to this.
42 people.
Imagine. I'm not going to cite all of them, otherwise we'll be here all evening. And in fact, if I was to do an intro, it could go all night. So, I want to say quickly that Ama Ata Aidoo has been a great influence, I know in Africa, but I know across the world, because sometimes we forget that this work has impact all over the world. But it has influenced me, and it has influenced new writers such as Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who here said to us that you were a great influence to her work. So this is good. But what has impressed me when I was preparing for this is just the breadth of influence that your work has. And sometimes we don't see this because it's very close, but the influence is quite immense. And it had a huge impact on writers and readers, both male and female, of all communities for a long time and across the different decades in which you've been writing. So for this, I think we ought to congratulate you.
Thank you.
Because some writers write one story and then that's it. But Amma is a writer we can read and read the next work and read the next word, and each time we are surprised and shocked by the new things that she brings up, and in a very sharp way sometimes, which challenges us. I've been challenged many times, and I hope we can talk about some of those things. And I think what I personally admire most about your work, Amma, is that you don't shy away from controversy. And I know sometimes it's difficult, and people challenge you and say, why did you write about that? You're washing the dirty linen of the community. Why did you put those two people there together? But your job is a writer, and you've shone the torch on issues that we should focus on. Some of them that have made it easier for some of us not to have to worry about them. But as Margaret Busby, Yaba Badu. Yaba, are you here?
Yes.
Can we recognize you, please? And Bibi Bakari Yusuf, are you here, Bibi? And many others, I can't see you all because there's a very bright spotlight here, but many of you present here will avow with me, Amma's work goes beyond the page to reality, where she has encouraged other women to write and how to be, more importantly. Although this is a conversation, I very much hope that we will hear those voices, Yaba, Margaret, and all of you, really, because it's a conversation. It's not just a conversation with me. So do come in and make it like our fireside conversations, but don't be too, but do join in the conversation. I think you won't mind. If there's a clarification, don't feel like you must save it, but don't make it too long also, And if you've got one of those ridiculous questions, like a personal question, please, as Amma herself would say, please. I can't. Yes. So let's stick to what's on the table, and I will be very sharp with time, and I will stop you if I feel that we are derailing from the purpose that has brought us here, but I know very well that none of you will do any such thing. Although this is some of examples, of course, of some work that Amma has done beyond the literary writing work, is working to encourage women to write, as Margaret's book we've seen from Daughters of Africa, that it was a groundbreaking book, so I have to mention it here, and I hope we'll mention it a bit. And also you have, with Jane Cortez, you founded YARI, the Organization of Women Writers of Africa, and that you've had YARI, which is a convention where women meet to speak about literature in general, but about the works that women are producing. But for me, what has really been very touching is you've had time to set up Basem, which is a non-profit organization which supports women writers and their work. I could go on and on and on, but I'd like us again to welcome Ama Ata Aidoo. Of course, Nana Wilson-Tago would be very cross with me if I didn't tell you which books Amma has written, so I will proceed to do that. There's Anowa, which is a play, No Sweetness Here, Our Sister Killjoy, Someone Talking to Some Time, The Eagle and the Chickens and Other Stories, Birds and Other Poems, Changes, which we know well, The Love Story, An Angry Letter in January, a collection of poetry, A Girl Who Can and Other Stories. Recently, in 2012, Diplomatic Pounds and Other Stories, African Love Stories, and Amma, I must thank you so much for including my story in the book. And Where Beads Speak, which we hope that we can look at today, which Amma has written with Essie Sutherland and Kati Tordu Dagadu. And of course, I'd like to mention a few honors that Amma has received, like the Millennium Award for Literary Excellence, which is Ghana's Excellence Award from the Awards Foundation in 2005, the Women of Substance Award by African Women's Development Fund, an Honorary Doctor of Humane Letters, the UNESCO International Award, the Commonwealth Prize of African Writer for Changes, and the Nelson Mandela Prize for Poetry, amongst others. So this is a person who, in all measure, has achieved a very great height for all of us. As I mentioned before, there are a lot of critical works that have been done on Ama Ata Aidoo's work, and I mentioned the one by Anne Adams, but Vincent Odampton's book, The Art of Ama Ata Aidoo, Polylectives and Reading Against Neocolonialism, which was published in 1994, is a very important book. And the work is, as I said, is international, is read beyond the worlds that we know. Esther Puglaris Noguer has produced an African autobiography, Ama Ata Aidoo's Literary Quest, Strangeness, Nation and Tradition in 2012, amongst very many others. Pages and pages and pages. So without further ado, I'm sorry you've had to be so quiet. We will turn now to you.
I'm listening.
Listening and learning. So we are going to watch a short film which Yaba has produced, just a clip, to start us today, and then we'll go to a question and answer session.
When I was growing up, my mother was telling me stories. I definitely remember that my mother told us folk tales. I must have enjoyed enormously being a listener of my mother, and I think once I became aware of myself, it had occurred to me that, maybe I should add to life's store of stories. I remember once, my grandmother told me of her travels. She told of the great places she had been to and the wonderful things she had seen.
Of the sea that is bigger than any river and boils without being hot. Of huge houses rising to touch the skies. Houses whose foundations are wider than any river I had ever seen. Tell me, Nana, who built the houses? She said, why do you want to know? The pale men. Who are the pale men? I asked. You ask too many questions. They are the white men. Who are the white men? I asked. A child like you should not ask questions. Why did they build the big houses? I asked. They say they built the big houses to keep the slaves. What's a slave, Nana? Shut up, child! You should not ask questions. A slave is one who is bought and sold.
Where did the white men get the slaves? I asked. I do not know, child. You are frightening me, child. I was not there. It was too long ago. No one talks of these things anymore. All good men and women try to forget. They have forgotten. Ghanaians have always been nervous about the presence of people of the diaspora here. And I think that was in part due to the fact that they remind us of what we don't want to deal with. And in fact, in the wake of the slave trade, we ourselves were colonized. We were conquered. And again, we have not really dealt with the implications of colonization. I mean, what is colonization? But being enslaved by a people. So the relationship between us and the African diaspora is charged.
I think Ama Ata Aidoo functions as a kind of front runner, a forerunner, a person who put on the table a series of issues which contemporary women can still deal with and continues to do so.
She was in California at the end of the 60s, right in the heart of all of the civil rights movement, of the anti-war movement, the hippie movement, the explosion of counterculture, feminism, everything that the 60s conjures up.
Ghana was at the forefront of ideas and thoughts, and people just looked to Ghana for Pan-African connections. It was a very exciting moment for all of us, and I think that she captured that.
She believes in Africa and African people. She believes in the primacy of African people's responsibility in making Africa what it will be, what it needs to be. And she also recognizes the beautiful aspects of Africa and African people.
She can write a short story of 3 pages and give you an entire world.
Say something.
Okay, we'll follow on from the film, and I just wanted to ask you, Amma, if you could say something about yourself, where you were born. We know you were born in Ghana, but we saw in the film the house where you went to school, some of the key influences then and now that have shaped your life as a writer, in terms of your upbringing, your education, culture, and the people around you.
I'm going to fight with her already. You know, if you Google, you'll get this information. Yes, but thanks a lot. You know, I was born in Ghana, in South Central Ghana, by the coast. I mean, not right on the beach, but as they used to say in colonial parlance, the hinterland. Yeah, and then I started, actually, my father, you know, that they established the school in our village because my father's place, where I grew up, is an island. It's an island, fresh water, like surrounded by rivers and streams. And during the rainy season, it used to, the place, the waters would rise. And before my time, my brother and others used to cross the stream, because that's the only way you could get out of the village, to go to school in our traditional town. The big town where the Omahini normally is. So it was decided that really it was too dangerous, and so my father saw to it. They opened the village school, and I started my education right there, and then I was sent to my cousin and his family in Takoradi, which at the time was Ghana's only port, and I went to school there. And then to Wesley Girls, as we say in Ghana, to the school. To Wesley Girls, yeah. And it was from Wesley that I went to university, and yeah.
Do you want to tell us about the typewriter and...
Oh, the typewriter?
Yes.
Okay, at Wesley Girls, when I was in Form 2, which was around 15 years old, one of our teachers asked me what I would do when I grew up, like what career path I would take. And without knowing where it came from, I opened my mouth and said, a poet. I want to write poetry. And hello, Miss Bowman. She's 91, and I would like to pay homage, to mention her here. She's in Yorkshire, at a place called Seto. Is it? Yeah, Seto. Anyway, she said, but Christina, you can't earn a living writing poetry. Poetry doesn't pay anybody. And then I think she thought about it and thought she had discouraged me. And the next year or so, she gave me an old silent Olivetti typewriter, which must have been an heirloom, you know. And that became, of course, a great source of encouragement, because I started publishing in the school magazine. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And we saw in the film, and you did mention the stories at home and with your mother and your grandmother.
My mother.
Your mother. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
About what?
The influence of the storytelling.
Well, yeah, my mother, I think we would describe her as an insomniac, because, you know, like she would sleep around 10, and then at 3 o'clock or from around that time she would wake up. And without necessarily finding out whether we were awake or not, or I was, she would start telling stories. You know? And what was thinking back on this, what has struck me is that, you know, nobody, in fact, people probably didn't know that she told stories in the morning to her children, because she wasn't even a recognized storyteller or anything like that. We had a professional storyteller in the village. He was a man. And that, yes. Listen, you have to take my words at their surface value. I'm not implying anything. Yeah, so he was called Ejamuni, and really we would gather at his place of an evening, and he would tell us stories. So I grew from my own home, the rest of the village, and then I think I was extremely lucky in getting or finding people, I just was nurtured, you see. I don't think that people were consciously nurturing me. But I was nurtured, because even my primary school teacher, my grade school teacher, was the kind of teacher, our school was a one classroom affair with, you get first years and second years. We were all in the schoolroom. Of course, now it's another type of school. It's a more modern. Everybody has their classroom. But he, one of them, Teacher Baden, I would like to also mention him here. He was very sensitive to us as young people, both in terms of giving us during the break, when he knew that we would be feeling sleepy otherwise. But it wasn't a kindergarten, you see. So there had been no provision for us to nap. But he would have us tell stories. And then at the end of the school year, he would also take us round the villages, near my village, our village, and we would do skits, plays and stuff like that. It was just wonderful. It was wonderful.
Shall we talk about books?
Sure.
And your first encounter with a book, and Would you remember what book it was? I remember mine. It was Jack and Jill. And, and in the school, whether you had books and what kind of books.
You mean in the village? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I encountered books in the village, but I mean, and they were in Fanti. Yes, they were in my language. And we had, like primary, I don't know about today, but anybody who grew up in those days, in fact, it's become like a trope in among Ghanaian jokes, like Kofi Niaba. We had all these primers in Akan. My language is the Fanti version of Akan, but everybody read Kofi Niaba through all Akan areas, Fanti, Ashanti, and so on and so forth. So that's when I encountered my first book. Yep.
Amazing. We encountered our first books in English.
No, I didn't.
As you can imagine. So this is very interesting. And then was there a school library?
Well, that we didn't have a library in the village, but we did at Wesley Girls, of course. Yes.
And can you tell us what kind of books you were reading?
Well, yes. You mean?
At Wesley Girls.
At Wesley Girls.
Yes.
Oh, Enid Blyton. Enid Blyton. I know that I was reading a lot, but I would also, since you asked me where I encountered my first book, and I told you it was in the village, but you see, if you had asked me, like my first substantial book or whatever, that was when I was living with my cousins in Takoradi. He was a teacher. Later, he became a pharmacist. He took London Guild something pharmacy, and and resigned from teaching, and became a pharmacist. But there were a lot of us kids in the house, and so there was no space actually for a library. And he had loads of books, which were not hidden, but they were just stuffed in drawers because that was the only space available for the books. And I would wait until they are gone, so I can tell a bit of my notice. I will wait until they were out of the house, my uncle, my cousin and his wife. And I'll go and open up the drawers, knowing the books were there. And so, like my first substantial book, Lord Alfred Tennyson's poetry. Yes. And stuff like that. And when I was in the, like any time I've been in the US and people are carrying on about Dracula, I'll tell them, listen, in the 1950s, I came across Bram Stoker's Dracula. That's where I saw it. So long before Hollywood, I knew about Bram Stoker's, but I encountered substantial books from my cousin, whom I called uncle anyway, from his drawers at Wesley Girls. At Takoradi. And then Wesley, we had the library. And then at the time, the holdings, the library holdings, the school had so many books. the library at the time was too small to hold everything. So I remember one of the common rooms in the school had been converted to, a small library, just some shelves with lots of books. And I volunteered to be, the librarian. That you would volunteer to be the librarian so that during off hours, student can come and borrow books from, and then you will record, and you will see that you see to it that people return them. And of course, I read lots. Like I'm saying, I mean, Jane Austen was definitely in the library, but what's her name? Enid Blyton, and all sorts of other, the great tradition. I mean, Blyton was not in the great tradition. So she and others, and adventure books, R.L. Stevenson, there, I read. I mean, those were the stuff that I read.
Thank you very much for that. I want to turn to your reading, to writing. We'll come back to reading, but I want to turn back to your writing, and I know that you are loath to separate your books and stories one from another, but do you have a favorite book?
I'll quote my sister Buchie Mecheta at this stage. Whenever people ask her that question, she would say, but they are like my children. I don't have favorites. And even if I do, I'm not going to tell you. That's Gucci.
Well, that doesn't help me very much.
No, it doesn't.
So what do we do now? We're stuck. I was going to now zoom in to your favorite.
No, but you see, that will not be fair to the audience. Did you come here to listen to me carrying on about my favorite book? No. So you better find another question.
Well, I have a favorite book of mine. And I think it's a favorite of many people, but they can fight with me as well.
Yes.
Because I'm sure they also have their own favorites. All of your books are, of course, my favorite.
Now, you see?
Before I get into trouble, I have to put a proviso, don't I? But it's true anyway. They are all remarkable books on a serious note. But I think the Anowa is a very significant book. And the critics come back and again to this book. What motivated you to write Anowa?
Again, going back to my mother, one of the stories she used to tell me was about, was about a woman. People in a married situation, and one day they were having some kind of a disagreement, altercation, and unfortunately, the woman said something to the man. Told him that, either you don't smell good or... And it became a huge thing. He took offense, rightly so, went to tell his family, and they said, your wife says you smell? Well, people will believe her, because, she's the person closest to you. But she shouldn't say that, because it is her duty as the wife to see that you don't smell. So if that's what she says, then she should give you, she should do something about it, give you a public bath. And what was this woman to do? She went to the, her elders, they came to beg the man's family, pleaded with them to forgive her, tell her what she could do to appease his soul. It didn't work. They went to the chief, they went to the big chief of the land, nothing worked. Everybody said, listen, this is what you have to do. So, of course, she had to give the man a public wash. And it didn't end well. What I mean, that was the disaster. It was a tragedy. What I don't remember is what happened. The marriage definitely cracked. That couldn't be meant, But what happened to the man and his wife is what, either my mother didn't go there or I have nicely forgotten. But Anowa was inspired by that story.
Amazing.
Yes.
Can I talk about Anowa?
Okay.
It's a story like that about young people who like each other.
Yes.
And the woman is, I'm on the right book, and they have difficulties with the community because of their desires which don't fit in. Am I on the right page? You look puzzled.
I'm listening.
And
You see, apart from the story told by my mother, which inspired the play, I must also say that if we are talking about Anowa, to draw our attention to the fact that later on I realized, and when the play was already written, that it is one of these African stories about, it's like a recognized folktale motif about the young girl who refuses to marry, the kind of young man or man who is approved of by her family, right? And she says, no, I don't want anybody around. And so she sort of selects her husband, who in these folk tales are normally very handsome strangers from no one knew where or knows where. And it never ends well. Tutola did it in the Palm One Drinker, yes. When people attack me for, Nana here? She did it first. She said, Ama Ata, how did you dare kill Anowa? But I didn't kill her. She committed suicide. She killed herself. But you see, I think I was also conscious of the fact, and at the time, I wasn't going to make a departure from this trope, from this motif. These marriages don't go well. And this is not new. But this is tradition. And in a way, I'm glad that I could hold myself from making too big a departure, except that it wasn't even that conscious, let me be honest with you. Anowa wrote herself, do you see? Including the end. There was an there was an earlier ending, where she goes mad. Yes, and appears on stage dressed like a Victorian English lady. But I discarded that because it would have been even more cruel, to let Anowa survive as some crazy woman,
Well, we laugh and we say things in jest, but you set the book 30 years after 1880.
1844.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it was a time of transition at the time of the Queen Victoria and the transition in Africa.
For the Gold Coast, for that environment, yes.
So it was a serious social issue that modernity and colonialism and slavery were coming into being.
Yeah, but you see, I didn't sit down at my desk to say I'm going to write a play about a woman at a time of transition, where colonialism and modernity were coming into being. You critics and people, you pick these things up. It's wonderful, but. Yeah, I mean, that's not how, I'm glad you can find all these wonderful issues. Yes.
But it is a tragedy.
Oh, sure.
In the end, that he dies.
Yeah.
And she dies.
And she died.
And it's not a happy ever.
No.
Which we would like. Or not of that story, but it is a tragedy for her. But what I really admired about the story is that she stood her ground from the beginning. I'll marry who I would like, as it were, and I will live by my thinking and my norms and how I see the world. And she didn't budge, although marriage and her family life were forcing her to conform and be a good woman. Mm-hmm. And this is a motif that has run through your work, and we'll come back to some of the other works. But it's a very early reflection, just in terms of the time of the writing, because people talk about feminism and things like that. This book is written very early also in the literary world and the world of ideas in the 70s. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a remarkable work, because then afterwards people try and fit it in a category, whether it's a feminist text or were you influenced by other things, but it was your own writing, reflecting, as you have said, on your own, a story that you heard from your mother, mm-hmm. which then people can now read in, as you say, the critics can read in any way that they want. And I want to come back later to this question of gender and how you've dealt with gender and your interest in gender in your work, and particularly the question of women. But we'll move that from that now and probably talk again about changes. Do you want to tell us a little bit?
No, what shall I tell you about? Hey, the book is there.
Some of us have read it, but some of us have not. I can tell, but please tell in your lovely way.
What am I telling?
What motivated
you want me to tell them the story that is changes?
No, they're going to buy
Once upon a time.
No. They're going to buy the book, I hope, the ones who haven't read it. Mm-hmm. And the ones who've read it might ask you some questions.
Yeah.
But it's about love.
Yes.
And you can tell a bit, and I can tell a bit.
Once upon a time, there was a young woman, a Ghanaian, I believe, called Esi Sechi. Esi, one of these really very nice looking, very bright in the mind, clearly aware of herself and what she wants. When the novel opens, she's getting ready to go to Zambia for a conference. So she goes to a travel agency, and she meets the CEO of the agency, and it was love at first sight. Meanwhile, she was already married. Fast forward. She leaves her husband. She agrees to become the second wife of this travel agency man. And yeah.
Did you skip
No, but I mean, they two didn't live happily ever after. Because she discovered that a man who has a second wife can have a third wife. So the relationship begins to unravel when she realizes that he was dating, I think, his secretary or somebody like that. And yeah, that's what happened.
So my question to you is, it's a difficult story. When I first read it, I was a bit upset.
You were?
By this.
Why?
I was upset that this intelligent woman, or seemingly intelligent woman, one would agree to be a second wife.
What? I mean, don't let me swear. But, you know. Well, you finish your
I'm just telling you my reading reaction.
Yeah, okay.
I know the reality, but I was hoping that she'd say something like, no, why should I?
But listen, she quoted him too.
Yes.
She wanted to be a second wife.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, if she had thought it all, worked it all out, she was going to be a second wife because, unlike in her first marriage, her husband will have another woman. I mean, his first wife, who will do all the choring, while she, Essie, pursued her career. Why would anyone want to if you want to be married, why turn that down?
Yes. Yes, I see the point. I was just saying
Because, you see, she thinks, I mean, you know, I'm not here an advocate, I'm not being an advocate for polygamy. But, you know, I think I could see Ace's point, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But you wrote her. You wrote her.
I wrote her?
You wrote her, yes.
She's not me.
No.
I'm not her.
Yes. But on a serious note, that these are challenges in society in Africa, and I don't know whether you know, recently in Kenya, there was a bill in Parliament on this very issue, and the women, of course, in Parliament and in society got very upset. I won't go into the details of it because it's not the purpose of the exercise, but these are real issues.
Oh, I do know that.
That go all the way to Parliament. And while we are on that note, your own work, and particularly from this book, Changes, because you raised an issue with her husband, and you brought up the issue of how they separated, and it was very controversial at the time. And we're just warming up, Sheila. Yes, we'll go. And let me finish this point. And shall I say what it was, or will you?
What?
The matter that raised the controversy in Changes, that she left the marriage because of sexual violence.
I mean, there was marital rape. You can. Everybody here is an adult, right? Yeah.
Yes. And it became an issue in society that that became a matter for legislation in Ghana.
Well, it's a lot. I mean, it's not just marital rape or polygamy, but violence against women in general. I mean, there was the bill. Yeah, You see, as her grandmother told her when she went to consult her grandmother in the village, she could opt, actually select, decide she would get, she wouldn't mind. But the reason why one cannot sanction polygamy anyway is because by and large, most women who get, who are sucked into it, they don't have aces choices. They don't have her education, they don't have her job, her sense of independence, and so on and so forth. And that's why, you can't have it. We can't let it continue.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which brings me to the general question about your concern about women generally in your work, and about women's voices and women writing. Because you've been a champion with your work, including the awards, the Yari Yari, and the Association of African Women Writers. Could you talk a little bit about, in the earlier days, about women's voices in literature and in publishing? And
you see, as an Akan person, woman, I've realized that talking about the marginalization of women on the international on any international platform is really not on, because we are matrilineal. Among the accounts, of course, much of it is lip service, but the notion is that every woman is a queen and every girl a princess. It doesn't pan out like this in our modern world, right? And even among the accounts, the head of the family is always male. And when we ask, so what is this about matrilineages and how, the security of the family rests on who the ancestresses were, not ancestors? Why can't we? What is this about men being the head of the family? And they say, oh, they are only heads by proxy. And my point is, women are not, if we are around, and we are around, why can't we do the heading of the family ourselves? Why have somebody else doing it for us as proxy? But what it actually means is that someone like me, I come to understand that compared to other societies, Akan women, I'm not saying it all, it's like we are spoiled and stuff like that. And when I knew a friend of may she rest in peace. I've known women who had they would have, or one person, a woman I knew personally had 3 sons and 1 daughter. When the daughter died, it was like she didn't have any more children. I have 1 daughter. When my daughter had a child, a son, and I went home to the village for the first time after the news, and some women came to the house and not to congratulate me, but to visit my mother. And then, they saw me and they said, oh, we hear your daughter has made a child? And I said, yes. And they said, she's a girl. And I said, no, he's a boy. And they said, oh, don't worry. God will give you a granddaughter, So, you see, this is so it's a bit funny for me to talk about whereas in Ghana, I talk about nothing else but, the marginalization of women, because it makes a lot of sense there. But in a world where women, are killed for family honor and stuff like that, how can I sit here and run on about how marginalized women are in Ghana? It doesn't ring true. You see, we are, of course, but relatively,
Different, yes.
it's difficult.
Thank you very much for that, Amma. You said in one of your books that they let a girl grow up as she pleases until she married of Sisi, and this is clearly depicted in many of the other works. In relation to what you've just said, this transition, can you comment on it?
Well, yeah, the comment is its own explanation. They let, when I was growing up, nobody said, don't do this because you are a girl, don't do that because you are a girl. But I do know that when people get married, then of course, they are like women everywhere. People, a woman must not talk, a woman must not do this, a woman must not do that, yeah. So there is that, you see. That too is very, after all, even in Ghana, it's like until recently, if there were a boy and a girl in a family getting ready for school, and if there was not enough money, the family could say, oh, let the boy go to school. Because as for the girl, she will grow up and get married and somebody will look after her. We know that's not true. It's, quite often, like it's her looking after him. But we are not supposed to say that.
On this note, could I please invite you to read something for us?
Okay.
And I will
because the time, according to this,
yes,
our time is running out.
Our time has run out. I'm sorry, audience, I got carried away.
Normally, I don't really care for this business when people say that, oh, she or he was the first to do that, was the first to do that. I don't believe in being first in, in any business. You have to have people, whose steps you walk in, whose shoulders you stand. But when I was in Lagos early this year, I truly, preened myself later about being the first. It was, I don't know where they had picked it up, the Etisalat Prize, Margaret. They said that, I am the first person to have published a flash fiction on the continent, where they got it. But I know that about 8 years ago, I've forgotten I was invited by the English department at the University of Exeter to contribute to a flash magazine they were just starting. I had done a flash without calling it a flash. So when the invitation came, I said, let me try. So I did one, and they published it, in the first edition of their magazine. And since then, I've done a few. And this flash was started about 2 weeks ago. It is still, in the state of getting edited. But the title is Toppings. And I don't know whether toppings is English. It is, I know it's American English. Like jam and stuff like that, toppings. And I called it Toppings because, of this story. From the moment Richard's main man came to me, I knew I had to do. By the way, the speaking voice is male. Toppings. From the moment Richard's main man came to me, I knew I had to do something. The message he had sent was that since I had thrice refused to let him see my answers during math exams, he was going to spread me like butter on his bread. Or was it jam? You think it's funny? I didn't think it was funny then, and I don't feel like laughing about it even now. No, I hadn't asked for further details, like whether it was real butter or margarine. After all, in our part of the world, most people assume they are more or less the same thing anyway. And if he had said jam, then what do you mean, what kind of jam? Of course, now I also know that there are different kinds of jams, including those that are not even called jam. He was from a good home. Even before his father became a cabinet minister, everybody knew that his people were highly educated and they had money too. And they must have eaten all kinds of jams. So if his main man had said jam, then Richard would have known which type they were talking about. At the time, it was not like that for me. My family was not rich. Nobody had been abroad before. So strawberry or apricot, neither of which we grow here, pineapple or guava, which we do, orange, sure, orange. Of course, that would be marmalade. Now, I know the difference. I didn't then. In any case, I didn't hear Richard's main man mention anything that complicated. But you weren't listening to me. None of all that would have mattered. He was going to spread me on his bread, and I got shit scared. So what did I do? Nothing to begin with. When I was a kid, my parents beat me for every mistake I made, as well as those I didn't make. Especially my father. First, he would make me kneel, then he got out some cane. Anytime I tried to tell them about some of the ugly things that happened to me in school, they never wanted to hear me out. So when I got home that afternoon, I just found a corner to hide. I had not even asked for my food. I stayed in that corner. I didn't even fetch my supper. I stayed in that corner late into the night and heard nothing of the noise my mother and others had made, screaming all over for me. In the end, they had found me asleep, and when they picked me up, I'd sobbed so pitifully that they sat me down, asked me what was wrong, and listened quietly and patiently until I came to the end of my story. Oh yes, it was clear they had felt bad and felt even worse when I still refused to eat, in spite of them trying very hard to get me to. But adults, they can be quite deep. I don't know when they had the time to organize, but organize they must have done. Now I know it was about 5:30 a.m. when we set out. We went in 2 taxis, each of them quite full. At the time, we seemed to have driven the entire length of this city and forever. When we got to the gate of Richard's home, The security guards would not let us in, maybe understandably. To the question as to whether we had had an appointment, we had confessed that we didn't. So, of course, the minister had not alerted them about us coming. Plus, it was just too early in the morning. And the old days, when people went at dawn on such important missions, were long gone, even then. As for the guards, how could they open the gates from outside? They couldn't. Someone would have had to open them from inside. Plus, they had their instructions. But I saw my parents and the other people begging and begging and begging. Then the security guards took pity on us and called the people inside on what was then known as a talkie-talkie. The gates opened. The taxi drivers parked their cars immediately, but were just as immediately ordered to switch off. We were told that taxis were not allowed in there. Of course, it must have been so even then. I mean, this business of not letting taxis go to many places where private cars are allowed. Of course, it's a stupid notion, because the biggest crimes are committed by the people inside, always, or those who drive in the biggest cars, always. But that's another of the long stories. So we got down, and after my father or somebody had paid the drivers and sent them off, we were led inside by whoever must have opened the gates. The house was big, huge even, and we found ourselves walking and walking and walking. The next thing I remember was us in a big hall, a man and a woman and a boy my age entering, and everybody on our side kneeling, including my parents. Of course, I just stood there like a piece of wood until one of the grown-ups shouted at me to also kneel. I did, but all this while, Richard and I had recognized one another immediately, and he had this look on his face that was victorious. That was mocking, threatening, and victorious all at the same time, and which he managed to keep throughout the encounter. I don't remember anything else from that meeting. What was said, if anything, and what was done, if anything, except this. When they asked me to get up because we were leaving, I had peed on myself. Yeah, I know. I knew, and everybody else knew, because there was a small pool of water where I had knelt, and once I moved, my shorts felt heavy and wet. My parents moved me to another school. Richard, I really didn't follow him much. In fact, I didn't follow him at all until I read his funeral announcement in the newspaper. That's when I became a little interested. He seemed to have led an ordinary life, like most of us. When we were kids, he kept telling us that he would be a shipping magnate. Frankly, most of us had no idea what kind of a profession that was. Now, I know that's not what he became. He was a businessman. Someone had said something about a drug lord who got caught a number of times but always escaped prosecution because everybody in his family was highly educated and rich, and his father had been a cabinet minister for a long time.
We'll have 2 questions. Sorry, we ran out of time listening. But if you do speak, please speak clearly into the mic because the event is being recorded and you can say who you are. There's a hand here at the front.
My name is Portia from SOAS. Ms. Aidoo, thank you so much for such a good evening. I wanted to ask, most of your work has been concerned with the Africans' interaction with the West. And the interaction, well, I guess I'll call it, I can't find a better word, but I'm thinking specifically of Dilemma, where you have the two different kind of memories on the shared history of slavery. And I wanted to ask, when you wrote it in the 1960s and now, do you see a change in how Ghanaians specifically remember slavery as a shared history between them and the Africans in the diaspora?
Thank you. The only thing is I bought a little at the notion that most of my work has been about interactions with the West. Changes definitely is not. Anowa, well, now, okay, I am agreeing with you. No, that's okay, in fact. Quite a bit of my work, yeah, thank you. About slavery, how Ghanaians, well, like, I was recorded in the film. I think that we Ghanaians are scared of that whole part of our history. Because we had internal slavery and then the external slavery. And I think especially because of the internal slavery, and it was, there was a kind of proscription. Among Ghanaians, I'm not just saying Akans, among Ghanaians, you don't talk about slavery. You don't call anybody a slave. It is not done. And that's where we've been, because we haven't debriefed. Then, it's like gone underground and colored everything. And it came, our unease. And of course, it is not a pleasant aspect of any people's history, of our history. But because we can't face it, we had not been able to deal with it, then it was like when we encountered the people from the diaspora, it's like, they are coming to compel us to deal with it, and we don't like it. That's how I read the situation. Maybe I'm not being fair, but yeah, and these attitudes, have impacted negatively on our ability to communicate properly with the diaspora.
Hello, Miss Amma. Very nice to meet you here. I have two quick questions for you. My first question is, so African literature in general is going through a renaissance where a lot of American and UK publishers are now publishing us a little bit more than they used to. So I just wanted to sort of hear your thoughts on that. And my second question is, are there any young up-and-coming African writers that you're excited about that you can share with us?
I wish we had more time. Well, it is wonderful that especially publishing on the continent, and most especially in Nigeria, we have to be very careful, because the sheer exuberance, baby, are you here, of the publishing scene in Nigeria is just fantastic. I wish, even though Ghana is like 1/10 of Nigeria, I wish we had 1/10 that same energy, in the publishing area in Ghana. There are publishers. The only thing is, it seems as if, apart from what is happening in Nigeria, in a place like Ghana, publishing is still very much geared towards, begging the Ministry of Education and the Ghana Education Service to pick a book for the schools. The people are not doing it, the publishers are still not interested in trade publishing. And it's so in that sense, we are still way out there in the 19 whatever.
I think there was a second part to that question, whether there's the young writers who...
Oh, yeah, that's what I needed the time for, right? There are lots of young writers. You mean like Africa?
Yeah, anyone that you're excited about.
But listen, why don't you Google? You see, this thing about Googling, it's not altogether a joke with me.
Right.
You can find so many, but yes, in fact, yesterday I was Africa, Focus on Africa. You know, the presenter, the interviewer started by saying something like, why aren't young Africans writing? And I said, whom have you read? And they have not read anything. You know, you mentioned, he could mention Chimamanda. And, but Chimamanda belongs to a category all her own. Yeah. But beyond Chimamanda, then he would flatter me with, people are not writing like you people did. I said, where? Have you read them? You cannot criticize people for not writing when you haven't looked for their books. Right. And you cannot criticize people for not writing with gravitas when you haven't even read them. So you see, I could give you a whole list of young people writing today in Africa who excite me. But I think that that's your job.
I think no more questions. I think it will be a terrible crime if we do not allow Margaret, who's here, to say something.
I have no voice.
So sorry, Margaret. And I didn't see you, Diane. Diane Abbott is here.
What? Let's recognize Diane Abbott.
And I feel very bad to be the bad guy. Bad woman, bad guy, Amma, but our time, sadly, has...
Yeah. Miss Abbott,
please say something.
Yes. Just a word or something.
Just to say, I read your books years ago when I was a very young woman. I thought they were astonishingly contemporary, and they still read astonishingly contemporary today. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Please join me in thanking Ama Ata Aidoo.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.